I'm always on the cautious end of like, make it easy. So you might go from the front yard to the backyard. That's pretty simple. A lot of people go from the front yard to 40 acres of wilderness. That's too much.
All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand, a deer hunting podcast. And today I'm on with none other than Mr. Dogbone himself, Jeremy. What's going on, brother? How are you?
Hey, great to be here. I'm doing well. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you making some time. I know your schedule's crazy busy. You got a couple new pups rolling around the house, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we've actually got we have a litter of 9-day-old pups, and it's a small litter, so it's a little easier on me. And then I've got a 13-week-old. Those are Labradors, and I've got a 13-week-old setter puppy here, so keeping me busy.
Yeah, it's like you have like a bunch of infants.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is. Our litter was scheduled C-section, so smaller litter, and so just for precaution, we did a scheduled C-section. So I got pretty good at. Mom didn't really warm up to pups right away. It took a few days, and so I got pretty good at wiping butts and cleaning up whelping pens. I slept in a whelping pen for 2 days straight. So.
Nice.
Yeah, it is a lot like that.
Yeah, I think people that have never had a litter of pups or took care of a mom with pups don't really recognize how much work or how delicate those first couple days can be.
It really is. Yeah.
I had the opportunity at one point in my life. I worked for a dog breeder of it was Rottweilers, Dobermans, and Fila Brasileiros. They had some champion bloodlines, and
sure.
They did training there as well and stuff like that. And I worked there for a little while, so I got to kind of understand the madness that you go through during that period of time.
Totally.
They take a lot of nurturing, especially if you want to do it right and have the dogs kind of well socialized from the start,
right?
Which is probably critical when you're talking about training.
Yeah, and it's definitely not our specialty. Like I am learning with it over the years. I've worked with some great kennels over the years, and tried not necessarily to get as involved with that part of it, but you do it long enough and you start to realize, for me it was anyway, I really developed a style of dog that worked best for me. And so over the years, enough relationships, enough contacts, in enough knowledge, I think, of understanding pedigrees of specific dogs. And so we have shifted in recent years. We have a litter maybe every year or every other year, very small, but it's for ourselves. I'm basically selfishly breeding, I would say, to try to find the best dog to fit our training style, lifestyle, and hunting styles. And I think that's what most breeders do, is they try to build their best dog. And so people ask me all the time, what's the best dog? Well, it has to line up with your preferences. So we're trying to do that the best we can.
Right. How did you, I guess let's just start at the beginning, where you're from and, what you do for a living,
Sure.
Or maybe even how specifically you got into the dog side of things and training and all the stuff that you do.
Yeah. So I live in Wisconsin. We're near Green Bay, a little town called Pulaski, and we actually live outside of the little town of Pulaski. So, I'm actually from Rhinelander, Wisconsin, which is northern Wisconsin, north central Wisconsin. But I moved down here in elementary school and lived around the Green Bay area. And then I went to school on the west side of the state. So I went to UW Stout, which is just a state school over there. Construction major. That's what was my family was really into construction. I was into construction. So went for construction management. And the dog part of it for me, really, like I grew up with golden retrievers. As far as like hunting dogs went, but we didn't have them when I was really young. We didn't get them till I was middle school and into high school more. So I would say, our family was really into them, but we weren't really that, we didn't have dogs much prior to that. We had one, it was when I lived up in Rhinelander, we had a Dalmatian. The 101 Dalmatians came out. Well, we had to have one. So, I mean, I was in like second and third grade. And so I do remember it, but it's probably a big part of like it's part of why we do what we do with people and their dogs. And the reason for that is, like, our dog wasn't trained at all. We had a little dog we named her Dalmatian, or we named her Domino, the Dalmatian. So we called her Domino, and she was a hellion. I mean, she was just wild, and she was untrained. And we took her camping once, and they just told us we had to. I mean, they were gonna kick us out. Like, dog was really, really not a good dog. It wasn't the dog. It was we weren't very good handlers. So
Right.
so that's my first dog. Well, I loved her. My sisters loved her. And one morning, my parents talked to us about it, and it was just a challenge. Well, one morning, someone came and picked the dog up, and they took it, and I watched the dog house ride down the driveway in the back of a hatchback, and I'm like, what is going on here? I mean, I was so upset. I was so angry at my mom and dad. It was the best thing for the dog, the dog that we rehomed her, basically. And so I think of that now, and I go, I have had people ask me, like, why do you do what you do? We try to give a lot of training information to anyone who wants to listen to it. Like, we sell training products. We've got a small business that sells training products that I've developed and work really well for me. And some is very specific to deer stuff, like shed training and game recovery tracking stuff. We've got a line of products for both. But we also, I'm a gun dog guy, and I do a lot of upland hunting as well. And so that was really what got me started into dogs, was gun dogs. And so we've developed since products that are associated with a pretty wide variety of dog training stuff. But the most of my effort probably goes into training and trying to help others that want to train their own dog. Like, I train dogs for people. I do a limited number each year. We're out a really long ways with the deposits. I mean, we're 3 to 4 years probably before we get to the next, if you went on a list right now. So that's not a big part of our business. The breeding is not, it's not part, I don't consider it, it's a write-off. Like, we lose money on it, basically. So,
right, yeah.
Unfortunately, but that's just what comes with it. But so the dogs are part of it. The training is part of it. The products are part of it, but they're also interlinked, and there's this connection between them. And I really believe that if we sell products, which I believe in, you have to know how to use them, because the tools don't do the work themselves. The tools help greatly, but you have to understand it's like a carpenter. You can give a guy a bunch of tools. He doesn't mean he becomes a carpenter. He's got to understand how to use them. So we put a lot of effort into creating content and information and sharing it through various ways, which today is really easy to do. And it's one of the beautiful parts of what we've got today going. So we do that, and people ask, why do you do all that? Why do you give all that information away? Why do you share it? And I quite honestly, because of Domino, like, I don't want some kid to have to see Domino go down the driveway. Like, that was tough. It was not easy to go through. So so that kind of that's part of what has brought us to what we're doing now. And I love dogs, I really do, but I love people, and I love the connection of the dogs and the people, and what that gives me by helping others. Like, we do training workshops here, and we impact a couple dozen dogs a year that come to the workshop. But I always tell people that these are handlers workshops. We're going to train trainers, not dogs. Dogs will benefit from it, but the relationships that we get out of these workshops, they're really intimate. They're small scale wise, but we get into such depth with people, and that to me is what I think is important. I think it's missing in a lot of dog training. Yeah. I think we look at it as more mechanical, and I do think there's mechanics, but I think that it's also very important to take into consideration things like connection and feel and trust. And that's the stuff that's kind of, I'm not kumbaya, like, we can't just like our dog a lot and it turns into a good dog. You have to have structure for it. And I just think it's a combination. I think it's a fine line. I don't think it's an extreme one way or the other. I think we're always searching to get in the middle. And that's what I call balance. And I think the beauty of dogs is, when you think about it that way, you can take those things and you can apply it to work and family and faith, and you can apply it to all sorts of stuff. And I really think it's valuable to have that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. I mean, just hearing you kind of tell that story, especially about Domino. you know, yeah, I had golden retrievers growing up too, and
Sure.
they weren't trained at all.
Sure.
They were sweet dogs, but they were a mess.
Yeah.
I had Rottweilers before, and I had Mastiffs, and then my daughter wanted a lab because my parents and my wife's parents had labs. My daughter loved them, and I wanted a good family dog. And I'm outdoors all the time,
Yeah.
and so I was like, it'd be great to have a dog that I could spend out, some time outside with. That's geared to do it, wants to do it, isn't going to tire. And so we ended up rescuing a black lab. He ended up being 100% black lab. But when you're talking about the relationship aspect of it, it made me think about my relationship. His name's Rocky, and we got him as like a year old. And he wasn't treated the best. Physically, he was fine, but like he wasn't in a great home.
Yeah,
we'll say. So when I got him, and his personality, his drive, his demeanor is completely different than any other dog I had as an adult. And so it was a struggle for like the first year and a half, because I didn't understand him. He didn't understand me, even though it's like I had worked with, and I'm not a trainer, so I don't ever want to give the impression that I am, but I know enough to be dangerous. I've always been able to get my dogs to work for me. I could get him to work off leash for me and those types of things.
Yeah.
And I was just struggling with this dog, and I was like, I cannot get him. And then I realized, I was like, I'm not paying attention to what he needs, like what he needs from me, not what I want from him.
Sure.
And as soon as that happened, and I recognized, I was like, man, he's got really bad anxiety. He doesn't want to be crated. Let me take him, not try to crate him if that's not what he wants. Let me see if I can just let him roam, and if that makes him more comfortable and gets him to be more trusting. And as soon as we made that one small change of like, hey, we're going to let you just be part of the home and not crate you at night and stuff like that, it was like he turned into a different dog.
Right. Perspective.
From there,
it's
everything fell in place then. It was like, I'm willing to work off leash now. I take him into the timber, and he's off leash the whole time. He'll leave my side and roam, but he always is looking back to see where I'm at. He doesn't ever want to get too far away. Always kind of keeping eyes on me.
Sure.
And it just kind of enhanced our relationship, because now he gets to do all the stuff that I've always wanted to do with a dog.
Yeah, now you're enjoying him more, and he's enjoying being with you more, and like it's about that perspective. You had to see it a little bit different. I think what's interesting is how you got to that point. And I really think that it's sometimes, like, as trainers, we have to kind of change. Every once in a while we have to stop, especially it's when things aren't going right. When things are going good, you just keep going. It's momentum. You just ride it and you build off of it. I always say it's incremental training. You're building off the last lesson. You're building off the last lesson. But then we always run into things. And so a lot of times for me, like, I've done it a long time. I've been training for, seriously, I've been training dogs for myself since, say, 99, I would say. That's when I got my first Labrador. It was when I first got my own dog. It was, I had trained the majority of the training for our family's dogs, but they were good dogs, but they were good family dogs. They hunted, but it was very natural to them, right? So I've been doing it long enough now and I've seen enough dogs, and I think that's part of it is you have the chance to experiment with things and see what works best with certain dogs, and this didn't work there, and you got to figure out ways to get around that. And so I feel comfortable now, very comfortable with if something comes up, I think I got another move, I got another technique, I got another thing I can try, and so that helps us get around it. But like, I still get jammed up. Like, I've done it long enough where I run into certain dogs and I go, that didn't work. I'll try this. That didn't work. I'll try this. And over and over, and I'm running out of ideas. And so some of the stuff that I have found is when I do that, I feel like I end up pressing. I really end up pushing to try to fix whatever it is I need to fix, because that's hanging me up and I know I got to fix it, and you can't ignore it. And I think that's right to a degree, but then a lot of times the best thing I can do is stop and take a break and move away from it and kind of rethink it, but not necessarily stop training. Just go work on something else. Maybe go and work on something else that might be somehow connected to a weak link that's maybe creating this issue for the bigger problem. But I was driving on the radio one day. I was driving on the road one day and listening to the radio, and I listen to a lot of, I'm in my truck a lot, so I listen to a lot of stuff. And I remember going down the road, and there's multiple times where I just light bulbs come on. I go, I'm going to try this with this dog. I'm going to try that with this dog. And all of a sudden it works. It's a totally different angle. And where does it come from? I don't know. But I think of it and boom, it starts to work. Well, the thing that reminded me of it was I was driving on the road, listening to the radio, and I like certain bands, and I'm listening to this band that I really like, and it sounded so different to me. It was like I heard the music differently, like I heard the instruments differently, and it was like, wow, like I really like that music, and I've listened to it hundreds and hundreds of times, and I know the song and I know the way it's supposed to sound, but this sounded different. And I was like, this is really an interesting thing that I'm hearing. Well, here I come to find out when my kids are playing with the truck and they screwed up my audio thing, and they changed the bass and the treble, and they had like the audio stuff all jumbled up. So right. I was hearing, like I would normally listen to it, and the music was in the back, like the instruments were in the back, and I listened to the words, and I would listen to like all the instruments together, and that was music to me. And the music was overlaid by words. Well, this time, the words, I didn't even hear the words because these instruments sounded so, like bass guitar sounded so different. And like all these parts of the band were kind of mixed up, but I heard it for the first time. And so I adjusted my music and I went back to listening to it the way I normally would. But I realized I appreciated that music a lot more going forward because I started to hear those instruments even when it was the way it was. So my point with it is, like, I think sometimes we just train the dog because that's how we train the dog. And what we need to do sometimes is hear the music or hear the instruments instead of the words, or hear the different instruments instead of the music. And but that's all mental, like that's all looking at it differently. And when you can do that and recognize that, you start to get deeper into it and you go, well, there's the fix. How come I didn't see that? How come I didn't notice that? So I've used the idea of, for you recognize there was just some things but you didn't have the control of it because you said you rescued the dog, right? So it's not like it's stuff that you put into the dog early on. Like I'm a big believer in the idea of, I've got a 13-week-old puppy right now that we're training, that the majority of the stuff I've done with her is make sure she doesn't form bad habits. Like, don't let her have problems. And so my life will be so much easier later because I just didn't allow certain things to happen. And that's training. It's not necessarily the most proactive, like aggressive training, but I will be the first person to tell you that I'm pretty boring when it comes to training dogs. I don't like to get stuff done quickly. I think it takes time for them to mature. It takes time for them physically and mentally. It takes a lot of repetition to become a real habit. Like, I don't want tricks, I want behavior. And so I think a lot of times we see accelerated training out there because it looks so good, and it does. It really looks good to get puppies to do stuff. But I caution people to not necessarily be always trying to be the first one to the end of the race, because the race doesn't end. Like, it's a marathon, not a sprint when it comes to raising a dog. It's just like a kid. Like, I don't want to hurry up and get my kid ready for college. First off, you're going to run into a lot of issues. But the other thing is I've got a sophomore in college right now. He's 20 years old. He's my son. And I'd give you anything to go back to those days where I was the Uber driver, driving him to basketball practice and this and that. And like, I was in such a hurry for him to get his license because I thought, man, this is gonna be great when he gets his license, because then I don't have to be a taxi. I would go back to the taxi any day, because it's the unintended consequence of all of a sudden, he's 16, he's got his license, and I don't see him anymore. And now he's off to college, and I go, man, I'd give anything to go back to those old days. So I look at that with these puppies and I go, instead of being in such a hurry for us to get to the end, which I don't think there is, I would rather have people understand, man, there's so many good things in between here and there that you should just embrace and enjoy as it comes.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree, man. And that's one of those things where you're right. Like, I did rescue him, and he came with some baggage, and that was the first time I never had a dog that I didn't have from an 8-week-old pup.
Sure.
And same thing that you're saying, kind of, I didn't necessarily know what I was doing, but I knew things I didn't want him to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I didn't want my dog to do, so I'd make sure that those things were in place. And I love the idea of like training for behavior, not tricks, and looking at the long-term view, because let's face it, man, when you get an 8-week-old pup or however old, whenever you get your dog, that's a, you know, especially with like a lab, for example, what I have now, like I know got it when it was a year old. So I know like at minimum, it's probably like a 10 to 14 year commitment roughly.
For sure.
You know what I mean? It's like that's the time frame we're going to have together. And so there's no reason to rush it.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so now that I have him kind of in a good place, you know, I started playing around with him with sheds,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because he's been really good like the past 2 years. And so I started kind of slowly introducing that to him in the backyard and stuff like that. And I've always wanted to ask you this. And I've talked to Tony Peterson about this. And every time I talk to him about it, he's like, oh, you just need to talk to Jeremy about it.
Sure.
He knows way more about this than I do.
Oh, boy. A lot of pressure.
You know, no pressure, right? I'm just curious to start. Like when someone's wanting to they've got a pup, you know, or they got a dog, whatever, however old it is, and they want to start kind of consider introducing sheds, or they would like to take their dog out shed hunting. Like in your opinion or in your mind, what makes a good shed dog? Like how do you kind of get to that point? Is there characteristics or traits, or is it more just in the, as you were saying before, like instilling those behaviors?
Yeah, well, I think it's a combination. I think I'm not a believer that it's by any means breed specific. I think you can use, and the best example of that is like, you know, I'm near Green Bay, so you walk around Lambeau Field on a Sunday afternoon when there's a home Packer game, and I've seen Beagles, I've seen Shepherds, I've seen Labradors, I've seen Golden Retrievers, I've seen lots of different breeds of dogs walking around that parking lot sniffing for stuff, right? So they're trained dogs. A lot of them are explosive dogs. That's what they're looking for. And so, but I look at that and I go, well, there's a lot of different breeds out there that you can successfully train. I think that the common denominator with them is most of them have some pretty inherent traits that are going to make life a little easier for that handler. You know, that biddability or willingness to please you, wanting to work with you, like that's an important thing. I think most dogs have that. Like I do think some breeds have it more. It's more intense, maybe. Like I think the same is true with the nose. Like the you name a breed of dog, they all have very good noses. Some are better. And I'm not a veterinarian or anything, so like I don't talk the science necessarily of it, the biology part of it. But there's more olfactory sensors in certain dogs than others. Like that's proven. Some have better than others, and some are built differently. You know, dogs that have long floppy ears, when they're tracking, like a bloodhound, let's say, or basset hound, the hound group, you look at the way they're built. Well, those ears create disturbance of air and lift scent molecules. Like it helps them smell. So when their noses are down on the ground, like they smell better. So it's partially because their internal parts are built to process the scent better, but it's also because their external things help them. You know, a tall kid plays basketball, goes a lot further in basketball than a little kid, you know? So like you think of that. So, you know, what makes a good shed dog is, I do think there's certain things. Natural game finding is really important. Like you can't train natural game finding. You can't teach dogs to have that. But a lot of dogs do. And when I say natural game finding, like the want and the desire to go hunt for something, the ability to use their nose really effectively, the intelligence to connect the idea of what it is they're looking for with what you've kind of instructed them to do. Those dogs that are walking around Lambeau Field smelling for bombs, the beagle wasn't bred to be a drug dog, but the beagle was bred for tracking. I mean, I've got a lot of cottontails. I mean, I've hundreds this year. The year is really high up by my house here. So I've got buddies that have beagles. They're going to bring their beagles here. I love hunting behind beagles. So they're going to bring their beagles and we're going to chase rabbits. And I'm going to bring my Labradors with. And my Labradors are going to heel alongside of me. And when we shoot the rabbits, we send the dogs to pick them because their beagles don't care about them once they're shot. So I'm using 2 dogs with really good noses. I'm using 1 dog that has a very natural retrieve, and I'm using 1 dog that has a very natural track. Now, will my dog track rabbits and chase them? Yeah, they would if I let them, but I turn them off of that because I hunt uplands with them. So I don't want them running snowshoe hare when I'm grouse hunting. So I have, because of my influence on the dog and because of my buddies' influences on their dogs, they don't want their dogs chasing deer. So they've turned their dogs off of certain things and they've turned them on to things that are certain things that are natural too. So we're looking at this scenario and we're going, what's the best dog for that? Well, the reason the Labrador I like so much is because they're really good at lots of stuff. That's not the reason I say get a lab if you want a shed dog. I say it because me personally, I say it because I like their look. I like what they do. I like their size. I like their personalities and disposition. I like the versatility from I can hunt anything and everything, and that's pretty much what I do. So I can do just about everything with them. I think they're super intelligent. I know they've got great noses. Their retrieve drive is very natural, so I don't have to, that's one less thing I have to train. When you look at all those boxes that I check, because I go, yep, they got it, yep, they got it, yep, they got it. Well, that makes life a lot easier when I go to train a shed dog. If you asked me to train, my little setter, I got the setter because I've got a place in northern Wisconsin. We do a lot of grouse hunting, and I'm really enjoying that more and more as I get older. So I've decided, it's something I've wanted to do for a long time. I put a lot of research into it. Got this puppy, finally, and I'm not going to use her to shed hunt. But could she shed hunt? She's got a fantastic nose. She's got tremendous range. I hope she's got some bidability and willingness to work with me. Like, I think she'll handle for me is what they call it. The difference between the pointing dogs and the retriever guys. My handling is like, my idea of handling with a retriever is like a little bit robotic, and I don't like that. I like dogs to work very naturally. So that, when we start talking about handling them and handling, they describe handling, the term, as the connection that I call with my retriever. Well, that's fine. It's just a difference in terminology. But I like this little setter's got way bigger range. She's going to go way further out than any of my retrievers do. My retrievers, I don't want them working beyond 25, 35 yards, and they're my shed dogs. And people ask, well, I don't want a dog working close like that. I want one that works out in ranges. Hell, I like to see the dog. Like, I go hunting because I want to watch the dog. Like, that's the most fun part of this for me. So I don't want dogs working at great distances. I don't want those retrievers that I'm going to hunt grouse and woodcock with to be outside of the gun range, because I don't think it's fair to them to have two sets of rules. I don't think it's as easy for me to say, hey, we're grouse hunting today, don't go beyond this distance, or hey, we're shed hunting today, run all you want. Like, I look at it as a consistency thing. I think you got to make it fair for the dog. So I develop a range, and then my dogs work within that range. But I challenge anyone that says shed dogs need to get out further than what mine do. I challenge you to, next time you're shed hunting, stop in a random spot. And as long as it's not a field, like if it's a field, Stevie Wonder can find the shed. You don't need a dog. Like, a hay field is pretty easy to cover, unless it's a really little shed. But so when you're in the woods, which I find most of my sheds are within 40 acres of a good food source. Like that's in unpressured areas. So when you get into those areas, I'm looking for the thickest, nastiest stuff that the deer bed in. That's where they spend a large percentage of their time. And a good shed hunter will recognize, like, it's a numbers game. During that window of time when they're going to shed their antlers, where are they spending the majority of their time? That's the highest percentage chance of getting one. So if not where they're spending that time, which is probably bedding, because the majority of the day they're in their beds, then what are they doing? Feeding. So when are they feeding? Go to their food source. It's probably not that far away, because late season is conservation of energy. Like, the ones that survive are the ones who move the least, who have to move the least, who have the food. So what do? I spend most of my time starting out where they spend most of their time, bedding. Where's the second spot? Feed. And in between. Like, and so when you look at the maps, you really don't have to probably hunt but a very small percentage. But you got to spend a lot of time in those areas. So I look at that and I go, for me, when I'm in those spots that are high likely areas to find an antler, if I stand still and spin around 360 degrees, I can't see 30 yards. If there was an antler between me and the 30-yard mark all the way around me, I couldn't see it. Like, it's too thick. Literally, you almost have to trip on them at times.
So yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. Like, as far as, not necessarily needing to range out, just if you think about it logically, the way you kind of explained it, as far as like the areas you're looking for sheds are going to be thicker than usual. You can't really see that far anyway. So
Right.
what's the point of having the dog be 75 yards out?
Right.
You know. So I guess that leads me to like my next kind of question, right? So if someone has a puppy, and let's say it's 8 weeks, 13 weeks, however old it is, you know, or just a dog in general, like what does the process look like for actually training them for sheds, and how long? And I know it's a marathon. We talked about that already, right? It's like, you know, I'd imagine every dog kind of learns and figures stuff out at its own pace to a degree.
For sure.
But, you know, what does that process for training a dog to find sheds look like? And what are the kind of fundamental stages where you'll see like growth, and how long until you could expect that dog to actually be what I would say is like a decent shed dog, however we want to qualify that?
Well, I think it's, you know, I think, and I don't want to disappoint you, because and I don't want to disappoint your listeners. I don't think it's you know, a step 1, step 2, step 3 type process. I think that any training of any dog requires, it's like building a building. If you don't have a good foundation, your building falls over. Like you can have the prettiest house in the neighborhood, but if you build it on sand, it's not gonna last. And so everything like that, I think there's a lot of things in life like that. And so what I look at it as from like if you go get a puppy, a lot of people are going to get puppies this spring, the idea of train a shed dog. I look at it and I go, for me, the puppies are puppies till they're about 2 years old. So like I really spend a huge percentage of my effort and time building a foundation under them. And so do I think it hurts to go? The nice part about shed training is you're really not going to risk, you don't have a lot of the risk that you have like if you were to put a gun dog in a position to be on a hunt too soon. You can run into some issues if you take an upland dog too soon. I think that is one of my biggest concerns, is don't create an issue early on that is going to create major issues for me for the duration of the dog's life. So from like a hunting perspective, I don't usually hunt my dogs the first season or two, like that I have them, because they're not ready. They're just not prepared for it. And so I look at it and I go, I weigh it out and I say, I might give up a season, maybe 2 seasons. That would be a lot, because if you give up 2 seasons, that's 2 years plus whatever the dog was before the season came in. So like that's a long time. I feel like I would give that up, because you just said before your dog's going to be 10 to 14 years old at a minimum. If you've got a dog with good genetics from a health perspective, you're 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. And so if everything works out. And so I look at it and I go, I would rather give up 2 seasons of hunting that potentially, and this is that, you know, hindsight 2020 thing. I don't know that this is going to happen for people, but I'm a numbers guy. I'm an odds guy. I like the odds in my favor. And so if I decide I need to rush it, I might get another season or 2 out of them. But if something happens in those early years that creates something that I can't get out of them, because gun shyness, like you put a dog into a position, you put a dog into too much excitement, you put a dog into things that create undesirable behaviors because of the uncontrolled element. The thing about the hunt is it's uncontrolled. So if you do that, you might pay for it for the next 10 plus seasons, and you may never completely get rid of it. And I look at that and I go, I would rather have 8 to 10 years of great hunting versus 10 to 12 years of pretty good hunting or okay hunting with thorns in my side. Because I've realized the issues come up always at the wrong time. Like if you have a hole in your training, it will inevitably come at the wrong moment. You know, it just always does. It's Murphy's Law. It always happens. And so,
because a lot of times the wrong moment is probably the most stressful moment, right? When
totally.
the most unkind of, not, I won't say unimaginable, because maybe it's not a catastrophe, but the thing that you've least kind of expected to happen is the thing that happens.
Well, it's that, and it's you know what gets in the way of dogs more often than not is handlers, like trainers. So you know, we get, I can't tell you how many times. This is why dog training is so good for people, is because if you get to the point where you realize the majority of the mistakes the dogs make are not the dog's fault, almost all of them. I mean, I don't know that I could say every single one, but it's like really close to every single one. So, but you know what it takes to be able to say that? You have to say and be okay with the fact that you screwed up. You made the mistake. Yeah. And it's really hard for people to do that. It's really challenging. We always want to have a reason why it happened, and it wasn't us, because we're not the ones who do that, right? And I think that with these dogs, they very quickly, as soon as you let that go, like internally, as soon as that trainer lets that go and goes, dog screwed up. Damn it, what did I do? What did I do wrong? And now how do I fix that going forward? And how do I do it better next time? They become pretty good trainers. The thing that happens though is, especially with people that don't train dogs a lot, is if you don't get to that point, if you don't get there mentally and probably emotionally is part of it, but if you don't get there, you're going to show your buddies. You're going to show your buddies how hard you've been working on your dog, and we do this and we do that, and I can't wait to show you. And so then you go to show them. I guarantee you, if you've got holes, that's when they're going to show up. Because you tense up, like I had a dog once that dropped short. This is before I even knew what hole conditioning was. This was in early 2000s. It's probably like 2001. Maybe 2000 actually. No, I guess it was early 2000s, but I'm not really good with years, but it was early 2000s. And I didn't even know what formal hole conditioning was. I didn't know what force fetch was. I didn't know what hole conditioning was. And I had a dog that would blink on dummies. You'd run out to him. He was really good. He did everything great. He'd run out to dummies, and 1 out of 50, he would just go to pick it up. He didn't pick it up, and he'd move on from it. And it was frustrating to me, and I'd get mad at him for that. And I couldn't, but it was like 1 out of 50, so it was like it didn't happen that often. So I didn't realize it was even a problem. Quite honestly, I just thought it's a fluke. And so I get into a setting with a big group of trainers, and as soon as my first retrieve, we're doing group stuff, and I'm going to send my dog on the first retrieve, his first retrieve of that session. He was pretty young too, and I lined him up and I sent him. And before I even sent him, I was so tight and tense because I just thought, do not blink on this dummy. Just don't blink on this dummy. Well, what does he do? Of course, he blinks. And they look at me and they're, ooh. And I go, he rarely does it. And this one guy was actually from England, and he's got his little English accent, and I'm not a little guy, he's a pretty little guy, and so me next to him, I look even bigger, he looks even smaller, and he comes over to me, and I'm thinking, oh God, and he, as nice as he could be, he says, what's the matter? I said, I don't know. He takes me aside. He could tell I wanted to crawl under a rock. I wanted to go away so bad from that moment. He took me aside. He said, have you hole conditioned your dog yet? He said, how old is that dog? I said, 7 months. He said, you hole condition him? I said, I don't know what that is. Let me talk to you about this. So he takes me, he was super empathetic. He knew I was feeling terrible, and it was a big lesson for me. And so I walked away. I hole conditioned the dog over the next couple months, and we never have an issue, and I never don't do it again. Well, I think that if you have a hole, it's going to show up. And it's going to happen on the hunt, or it's just going to happen at the wrong time. So I think being honest with ourselves is really important when it comes to our dogs. Recognizing they got chinks in their armor, they got missing links in their chain, and hell, you can't go any further without it. No matter how much you want to, or how bad you want to, or there's a date for this test or whatever, that's not the important part.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you, man. And it was no more apparent than it was for me with Rocky, just kind of recognizing that I was messing it up. And even still, it's like I'm trying to teach him how to find sheds. And I wanted to get your advice. I thought this would just be kind of a fun way to kind of talk about it, because I started introducing him to sheds last year. Have a set, real antlers that I use in the backyard. First I just kind of gave them to him, let him play with them. You know what I mean? He enjoyed them. He would sit and chew on them or whatever. And then I started just playing. He's a lab, so he'll retrieve anything I throw. Sure. He just, and I'm sure I never had this before. This was new for me. I had to get used to him always walking around the house with something in his mouth. Like, he won't not go anywhere without something in his mouth. And so I started with just like putting him on a stay, throwing it, and then telling him to find a shed, and he would go find it, and he would see it, and he would go get it and bring it back. And I went from that to like putting him on a stay, like in the sunroom, and I would go like hide the shed, or stick it somewhere in the yard, and then he would go out and scan around, and he would see it, and he would go grab it and bring it back. And then once he got okay at that, I would make it a little bit more challenging for him. And then I moved to putting 2 sheds in the yard at like different areas, and he would find one, have to bring it back to me. And then once he brought it back, I'd tell him to go find the other shed, and he would take off and try to find that. My thing is that I've not yet taken him like out of the yard, beyond that to kind of find sheds or do anything like that. So how do you take a dog from someone who, like me, is having fun and it's a game and we're playing in the backyard and he loves it? How do you evolve that to kind of go from like the controlled yard environment? What is the next step for that to evolve him to where I could eventually get him into the timber and have a reasonable expectation that he's going to have a good time, I'm going to have a good time, and eventually he'll find a shed?
Yeah. Well, I think your story is probably a lot of your listeners can say exactly same thing. And I think because I hear that all the time. I hear, this is what I did, this is what I did, this is what I did. It's the same steps that you're doing. But then we go shed hunting and he runs over sheds. Frustrated, A lot of people quit because of it. Because he just doesn't know how to do it. I look at it, I like here's a way to make people think about it. I used to have a little Nerf basketball thing that hung on the back of my door. When I was growing up, I was the best Nerf basketball guy in my room. Like, I made every shot. I got perfect at it. I got really good. I was Steph Curry of the Nerf basketball in my bedroom. I knew all the angles. I knew everything. If you trained me that way, and then you took me to the Bucks arena down in Milwaukee and said, here, play basketball with these guys. You're really good in your room playing with the Nerf ball. Play basketball with this guys. Like, I don't think I would do very well in that. That's not properly setting me up to transition. So I think what has to happen is we have to recognize everything that we do that we run into our dogs. I break it when we run into an issue, especially. It's usually because we took too big of a step too quickly. It's usually because there's missing parts. They don't have all the skills that are necessary. I had a message from a guy that told me a bunch of stuff that his dog was doing, and he was trying to do some finished end things with the dog. And I said, well, you sound like you're on a really good start, but you got holes, and you can't complete the journey without all the rungs to the ladder. So I think that what we need to do is we need to look at it and go, your end goal is to shed hunt with your dog. So break that all down into, like, what does the dog have to do? Well, the dog's got to quarter and cast. You don't train quarter and casting at the same time you train retrieving. You don't train retrieving at the same time you do using your nose and nose work. You don't train, like, I need a dog to recall to me. So, like, I think of this big picture of going shed hunting. If you've got a dog that just runs wild, but finds all the sheds in the world, some guys might like that. I can't have that, because that dog will get shot by some neighbor because it runs on their property. That dog will get hit by a car because he runs away. That I don't like it because I don't even see the dog. Like, I want a dog, so I know what I want. I want a dog to work within relative range, work with me, cast and quarter, use their nose, use their eyes. They see something that is they smell something that's worth looking at, they'll go look at it. If it is a shed, they'll pick it up and bring it back to me, and then they'll get rewarded for it. Like, it makes me very happy, and I praise them for it. I don't want a dog to smell them out, find them, lay down and chew on them. I don't want a dog to smell them out, find them, pick them up and run off with them. I don't want a dog to smell them, look at them and run away from them. I want certain things. So I have to take that end beautiful painting that we just picked, this picture that we painted, quarter and cast at a desirable range, use your nose, smell something, go look at it. It is what you want. Pick it up, bring it back, hold on to it, bring it to dad, and then hold it nicely so I can take the pictures for Instagram. I mean, that's really what we need, right? So, right. But and I don't. And the last part is kind of a joke, but I don't want dogs dropping stuff, because my shed dogs also bird hunt for me. So I don't want bird dogs to drop birds short, because wounded cripples run away. Sheds aren't going to run away, but I need them delivering it all the way to hand. So these are all things that we want the dogs to understand. How do you get all that? You teach it all individually, and then you start linking it together. Your dog knows the game of hide and seek. Hide and seek is not shed hunting. Like, I would, I'd challenge anyone listening, or yourself here thinking about it. Like, when you set these all up, Like it's no different with tracking. Like when we set up a track, it is not a track. Like it's a mock trail that we get more out of than the dog. I really believe that. We understand to read the dog's body language. I lay the track, I know where the trail is. I'm going to watch the dog and I'm going to understand if they're on it or not. And I'm going to start to pick up on cues that he gives me visually to understand what it looks like. When we actually go tracking, that's when the dog has to work and the dog has to understand and I have to work with it. We're a team. When we shed hunt, the game of fetch, throw the antler, go get it and bring it back, it's fine. But is that what I do to get myself? Do I pick up from there and go shed hunting? No, because I could have done that with a stick. You could have done that with a tennis ball. You could have done that with a pop ball. The idea is inherent for the dog to run after something and pick it up and bring it back. But never have I seen a deer run through the woods and shed its antlers in front of me and my dog so that the dog had the visual thing and then ran out and picked it up. It doesn't work that way. So what do I have to do? I want them to quarter and cast and use their nose and pick stuff up off the ground pre-existing. So what do I have to do? I can't just go and quarter and cast if they don't understand the idea of picking up something off the ground. They think it's got to get thrown. So there's drills that we do. So the mechanical part of it, like I do a drill called a trailing memory. I use it with gun dogs as well, but for different reasons, similar and different reasons. I use the drill with a gun dog to build patience. I get dogs to extend longer. But with a shed dog, the value in that drill is you get the dog to pick the dummy up or the antler up off the ground after a set delay of time. So you actually walk the dog out in heel position, you drop the antler, you pause, you turn around, you walk back. You can go 1,000 yards or you can go 15 yards, doesn't matter, but you create space, you create distance, and then you create time lag. And so the short-term memory part you get past with the dog. The dog's got this thing about them. Pressure and praise has to happen quickly, because they can only associate it with the action that led up to that moment for so long. It's really short. So if you correct a dog, I hate to break it to some of these people, but if the dog pees in the house and 20 minutes later you see the pee and you go and you stick the dog's nose in it and rub the dog's nose in it, all you're doing is punishing the dog for whatever he was doing the moment before you picked him up and rubbed his nose and piss. Like it had nothing to do with peeing because he didn't connect that action to it. So the same goes with praise. If your dog does something right and you wait 10 seconds and then you tell them they're good, they think they're good for whatever it was they just did, not for what they did 10 seconds ago. Timing is really important. So with this time in the trailing memory, you build it beyond the short-term memory, and now it goes into the long-term memory. It's nice for gun dogs to remember multiple birds. It's nice for the shed dog to understand that when they go out and pick up an antler, it's not thrown. I didn't throw it. They forgot the idea how it even got there. It's on the ground, you lined them out, and you sent them. Well, you have to have a dog that lines pretty well to do that drill. You have to have a dog, think about how we set the drill up. If your dog doesn't heel, you can't do that drill. Because if your dog doesn't heel in heel position, and I prefer it to be off lead, but you can set them up on lead. We've got a product that I think makes it easier to do that with a little quick snap lead to the slip collar and a whole different thing. But that's a tool that makes my life easier. But if you can't heel the dog out to set this drill up under control, the idea of what you're trying to get out of it is lost. The drill is not a heel drill work. The drill is set up to get the dog to understand to pick stuff up off the ground with delay. And if you can't even get there, the dog won't understand that because he's just struggling with you on heel. So that, like, when you boil all that stuff down, the foundation has to be there. Heel, sit, stay, come when I call you. Like, the dogs that pick stuff up and run away with it, what's a fix to that? Recall. Call the dog back and they come to you. So if your dog understands here or come or whatever your command is, when they have something in their mouth and you say, it's one of the reasons why my son's got this puppy of ours. We whelped a litter last year and my son kept one. Puppy is a little less than a year old right now. And he recalls really well. My son's not a very good trainer. He's done a very nice job with this dog. I credit the genetics, but he it is a very nice dog, and he's done a really nice job of not making mistakes. So he's got this dog that recalls very well, and he retrieves very naturally. He carries stuff very naturally. And so my son was home over Christmas break from college, and we looked at some retrieving stuff with him, and he'd only done retrieving. He'd retrieved very little with this dog. And so I was curious to see how it was going to go, and threw some dummies for him, and dog picked it up. And on the way, picks it up very nice, carries it very nice. But on the way back, he got a little distracted. We were out in a pretty open area, and he got a little distracted. And as soon as he got a little distracted, I said, Chief, here. And as soon as Chief heard me say here, he turned and he just came right back in. And I went, the retrieve is natural to him. He loves to do that. But the recall is what helped me there the most, because he's got very good recall. And so, again, foundation. And I'm boring that way. And I think people go, oh, God, more of this. Oh, God, if you don't have it, you don't have a chance to shed hunt. Like, you're crossing your fingers and hoping.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, he does, recall. I wouldn't go as far as to say that in terms of like, I think probably what you expect for the amount of work that you put into your dogs and stuff. But if he has something and I whistle, just give him or whatever it is, he comes right to me. You know, he'll bring it, drop it up. If I tell him to drop it, he'll drop it at my feet. Yeah. But he'll hold it until I tell him. I can get him to heel off leash. So, if I walk him around the neighborhood, I can take him off leash, even if there's another dog or whatever, or a squirrel. Yeah. If I just snap my fingers and tell him place, he'll just stay right by my heel or right by my knee. His head will be right by my knee. Perfect. Typically, is where I kind of want him. So it's like I feel like he's got all the right kind of pieces so far. Yeah. It's like I just haven't yet taken him and introduced like what you were talking about with a gun dog, where the unknown, he hasn't had yet, and I'm just not quite sure, how to kind of introduce him to that, because I don't want him to fail. Sure. I want to make sure he has a good experience, right. And I want to at some point during it to be able to give him some praise, so he knows that he's doing what I'm expecting him to do. Yeah, and that comes. My answer to that is it comes slowly and incrementally. So like you mastered the game of hide and seek, or in the yard. That's good. Mm-hmm. Now move that game somewhere else, because he's good at the game. Move it somewhere else that may have a little bit more temptation and distraction. Like I don't want to set dogs up to fail ever. So I'm always on the cautious end of like, make it easy. So you might go from the front yard to the backyard. That's pretty simple. A lot of people go from the front yard to 40 acres of wilderness. That's too much. And then the dog gets distracted. The dog doesn't listen. The dog doesn't have the foundation that your dog has. And all of a sudden the wheels come off and the person's pissed off and they're hollering at their dog and the dog doesn't want to do this anymore. And neither do they. So like it goes out of control pretty quickly. But if you go from this hide and seek game, now that's part of it. But I also think there's a lot of other parts. I don't know where you're at with quartering and casting, because when you go out to work your dog in the field, they got to work in range. So can you explain what quartering and casting is? So quartering and casting would be like a sweeping. Like they'll sweep the field in front of you. So they're going to go from, they go from left to right in a pattern out in front of you that's covering a lot of ground, working whatever scent cones they can to their advantage. So it's them getting out and ranging, but within range and controlled distances that you want, desirable to you. So I want a dog to do that, but I train for it. I think most dogs do have an inherent quarter to them. I have one dog that has a pattern where she goes out and around and comes back to me. That's her. It's so crazy that you say that, because I noticed that with him, and I wasn't sure what he was doing. This is like me again, going back to what you were saying earlier, like me not knowing. Sure. Like the dog full well knows what he's doing, because we play the game. I hide it from him or whatever. We're playing a hide and seek game, and he'll go out in the yard and he'll start kind of. It's almost the same. Like he'll kind of run the same route every time, looking for it and kind of seeking. And I've always been like, why does he continue to run these routes back and forth, and how he's kind of looping around the yard? Could be two things. He might have the game memorized. He might have your course memorized. So that's part of it. But then the other part of it is, so what I would do is I'd change locations and see, does his pattern remain? Because then it tells you it is. I think that we can only impact and affect that so much, but what we have to do is understand and start to learn what dogs do individually, and then use that to our advantage. I've got certain dogs that work certain covers better because of the way they cover the ground, and that's a stylistic thing. Like that's the beauty of that's when now we're getting into stuff that gets me excited. That's when it gets back into like some breeding things. And so there are certain traits that dogs have that we try to leverage positively. There are certain things that they don't do very well. We try to eliminate if possible, or minimize the effects when it comes to the next generation of it. But now when you start building like
tuning that so finely that you're matching up the style of training to the style of dog and then the style of hunt. And when you get all those parts and pieces in place, it's really beautiful. But like, I think for you, it's, you know, you got your dog, like I said, trick before or behavior. And so your dog understands the trick, which is great. The problem with tricks are they're false senses of security to the handler. Because you look at that and go, well, he found those sheds. He probably can go shed hunting. If you had a duck dog that you could have a buddy throw a dummy and blow a duck call, mack, 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 throw a dummy, and the dog would go get it, and you'd maybe shoot a 22 blank. Like, if you got a buddy that's got a dummy launcher and you can fire that and the dog runs and picks it up, oh, must be ready to go bird hunting. Well, there's so many other things that are going to happen that if you don't prepare for all those other things, you're going to have a hard time. And so I think you look at, we got to look at, I don't want to overcomplicate shed training because I don't think it should be. I don't think any dog training is complicated. I think it's extremely simplistic and common sense. But I also think construction is pretty simple to me too. And like, I look at construction, I go, well, there's total logical reasoning for strength and structures and all this stuff. But my wife has a hard time building a little step stool for our daughter to wash her hands. She couldn't figure out what. She's not a carpenter, and she didn't join the carpenters union and get her journeyman's card like I did. She didn't do all that stuff. The construction is simple, but anything we do is, most things out there are relatively simple until you realize that you want to get into it, and then you start peeling layers back and you go, wow, the complexity of this is, I mean, ice fishing. You sit on the ice, you have a pole and you jig, and there's fish down there and you catch them. Like, that's not hard. But I did it for a long time and didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I had buddies that are very good at it, and I go, it's not a coincidence. Because ice fishing has all these complicated depths of layer, and I shouldn't say they're complicated, but there's lots of layers to it. So I think when it comes to the shed training part, it's simple. It is. But does it take your willingness to continue to pour into it and peel back those layers and start to think about it and understand it a little more complexly? Yes, it does. If you want to take it to that level. But at the same time, for the guy who's listening to this and goes, or girl that's listening to this and goes, I don't know if that's me, let me pose it this way, because I'll take the pressure off. In the spring, what are you going to do with your dog? If you're going shed hunting and you take them with, will they find one? They might. If they don't, what's lost? You're taking your dogs for walks. You're spending better time with them. I shed hunt more because I have shed dogs. How come? I love antlers. I love them. I mean, you look around my house, I get a lot of them. I love them. They all have a story. I don't have an interest in going and shed hunting someone else's farm. I want to shed hunt mine first because I'm really passionate about the deer. That's another element of the deer hunting for me. But if it weren't for the dogs, I wouldn't go nearly as much as I do, because the same could be said for me about ducks in upland and anything I do with the dogs. I have no interest in going if I'm not bringing those dogs with. So that to me is the beauty of shed training is, yeah, you can get into some very serious depths of it and you'll get better. Trust me, you will continue to get better if you do. But you also can be like that weekend warrior guy that says, you know what? That's why we sell a shed training system. It's a kit. It's got a training dummy, a bottle of scent, and a booklet. We have a DVD that kind of goes with it, but they're not sold together. So the information and the products that I use to train my dogs, because they made my life easier training. Yeah, you don't have to have them. I think they make life easier, and I think they help you. They're beneficial. If you do that, the investment is not great. Like, it's not a lot of money. You can get into it all for under $50. So if you put in $50 into something and my dog finds one more antler for me, I think it's justified. If you don't find an antler and you end up going with your dog shed hunting and you spend an extra 10 hours in the woods this spring, you're going to lose a few pounds. You're going to scout some new, you're going to probably find some better spots for your hunting in the fall. You're going to get fresh air, you're going to get vitamin D, you're going to get some sun, you're going to feel better. Like, I have a hard time waiting for that winter to break. I can't wait.
I'm chomping at the bit right now, like totally. to get out. And since I got him and he's been doing, it's been like 2 years that he's been doing really, really well. I scout way more now that I have him to go along with me.
Yes.
Because I just got a buddy to tag along. Like, I built this travel trailer. We'll go a couple hours away to this one piece of big public I've been scouting out. I take him with me. He stays in the trailer with me. We make like a couple, like 2-3 day weekend out of it, where it's just me and the dog hanging out in the woods in the trailer.
Yeah.
And it's just like a dude's weekend. And I just love doing that. He loves it. I love it. We spend time together. And if he eventually finds a shed, then that's even better. But it's what you were saying. It's just, and I love watching him work. Like, even though he's not been trained, like when he smells something in the woods, and I get to see him really kind of like almost that natural instinct kick in.
For sure.
It's like, I mean, that's one of the coolest things to watch, is just him be curious, where it's that ancestral drive of his past, taking over. And that's just one of the coolest things for me to see.
Everything's better with your dog. I mean, it just is. And so I feel like sometimes we have to remind people of that. We have to remind people that you don't have to, you can be as serious as you want. Like, you can take it as far as you want, but you're gonna find more with the dog, and it's because they're another set of eyes and they're another set of nose. But if you're gonna go more often, you're gonna walk more miles, you're gonna get into better places, you're gonna go, like, I go places with the dog shed hunting that I never go any other time of the year. So like, it's just for deer hunting's sake, we don't go to certain spots. It's exciting for me. I feel like I'm trespassing on our own land when I go into some of these spots, because I'm like, man, I shouldn't be in here. What does it matter? It's March. And they've shed, and we're not pressuring them. The snow is melting. They're in good I mean, it's a lot of fun, man. It's something that, and it's something that you can do in addition to what you're doing with your dogs the rest of the year.
Yeah, man, I know we're just about up on time. I want to be sensitive to your time, because I know you got some stuff to get to this evening. But if you had to just leave people with like 3 thoughts about them wanting to, explore shed hunting with their dog or get their dog more involved, like, what would be those kind of 3 things? Like, if you just think about these 3 things and have fun, what are those 3 things? Be
patient. I think that's the number one thing with anything with dogs. Be patient, because when I say that, I mean, don't rush, don't force, don't push. It's no fun for you, it's no fun for the dog, and it's really counterproductive. So I think that's like a dog thing that can be applied to everything. I think the other part is have realistic expectations. My gun dogs need seasons before I call them gun dogs. My shed dogs need seasons. And the problem with the shed dog is the opportunities for them are a lot less than the gun dogs. So you have to remember that. Be realistic with that, and be okay with it. So, and I think the other thing is put it in perspective. I had a gal that we did a podcast episode with, actually, for our own, and she had made these analogies with these kids, and her kid broke a board in karate, and she was really excited about that. It was a little board, and the kid broke it, and she was very excited. She also had a dog that found 4 sheds out of 14 that spring before, and she was a little disappointed because it had only picked up 4 and it ran over a few, and so she was a little disappointed in her voice, and I knew that. And I said, your kid just broke a little board, and you were real excited about it. You could have been disappointed in that because it wasn't a very big board, but you're not going to be. Your little kid just broke a board, and my little one just came in, so joining the podcast here is Lillian.
That's right.
So what I think is, by putting it into perspective and understanding young dogs, when they do things, it's like little kids breaking boards in karate. Like, celebrate it. Right. Feel good about it. Let them know they did it well. So it's putting it in perspective.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Before I let you go, buddy, let everyone out there know that's listening where they can get your products, where they can find out more about you, and where they can check out your podcast and get a lot of really great information straight from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, thank you. It's Dogbone Hunter. So like dogbonehunter.com is the website. If you search at Dogbone Hunter, it's all of our social handles. The podcast is Dogbone Podcast, PAWDCAST, but you can just little clever idea we had in the beginning, and probably not the best marketing thing, but but if you just search Dogbone on any of the apps, it probably is going to pop up for you.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, I appreciate your time. Good luck to you this shed season.
Yeah, thank you, man.
I might text you with some progress with Rocky and let you know how he's doing.
Please do. Keep me posted and let me know if I can help in any way, okay?
Will do. Thanks, man.
All right, buddy. Take care.